So I'm learning about communism. I'm learning more about, socialist policies and examples of socialist governments or social democracies or democratic socialist governments, blah, 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 blah. And of course, on the left, all of us talk about class consciousness. And this is so important. I mean, this is super important to me. This is important to a lot of us because it's the idea that instead of allowing disagreements, or not just disagreements, but more like strong divisions, pull us apart, that the only way to bring about real change is to band together as the working class against the ruling elites, which here in 2025 has brought about the widest wealth gap between the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer than ever in human history. It's also, decimating this planet's natural resources by its decimating. I'm talking about capitalism is decimating this planet's natural resources. And so we talk about class consciousness and how important it is to reach across party lines and band together. Well, one thing that I know I struggle with, and I've seen a lot of other people struggle with too, is recognizing that the vast majority of conservative Christians are in the working class we're trying to protect. And that's hard for me because dealing with Christian conservatives can be super challenging, to say the least. Just because, again, it's going back to echo chambers. Like their algorithms are feeding them. They're just like consuming this AI schlop, and barely any actual information is being fed to them. Conservative Christians are too programmed to see it. Yes, I don't disagree, but my point is, like, we're in our own echo chambers too. And again, if we really want to talk about class consciousness, the vast majority of conservative Christians should be considered on our side, like quote unquote, the side of the working class is what I mean, because conservative Christians are too programmed to see it. I think another layer to that is that they're living in just as much, in a lot of cases, poverty and lack of education as a lot of people on the left. Now, this is a wide generalization, and I'll be the first one to say the main difference between the left and conservative Christianity is that conservative Christians actively have people in power in the White House right now. And it's always been a class war. They've just convinced us to believe it's a culture war. Exactly. Well said, Super P. I think, and again, I struggle with this personally because I have family members who are very adamantly Trump-loving, MAGA-supporting, conservative Christians. And if we want to talk about how the working class, actually, let me back up. Let me zoom out even further. If we want to talk about, with all of this scientific evidence and empirical study of nature and human evolution, all of the things, if we want to say that we're all just products of our environment, and therefore how, certain like more violent communities aren't because they're more violent people, it's because the system is kind of instilling violence in them by not giving them an equal access to resources and healthcare and safety. And in fact, police are more militant towards certain communities. So of course they have to react with more violence, etc. We're aware of this. We're conscious of these components, but that then translates to looking at conservative Christians and recognizing that them doubling down in their beliefs and them kind of buying into the programming, the schlop that they're fed through Fox News and fucking Facebook, which I'm the biggest Facebook hater. I just hate it. I use Instagram. I'm a total hypocrite, but I fucking hate Facebook. Just throwing that out there. Almost as much. No, I hate it more than I hate Jordan Peterson, and that should really say something. So going back, we have to recognize that conservative Christians, the vast majority of them are just a product. Well, they're all a product of their environment too. And again, the only difference between working class conservative Christians and ourselves here on the left, us dusty, crusty, communists, commie socialists, whatever, atheists, whatever, the only difference is that conservative Christians have proponents of their quote unquote ideology in positions of power in the White House. Now, the reason I say quote unquote is because we've seen by and large that those political figures in the White House, they don't all actually adhere to quote unquote Christian values. They don't even all consider themselves Christian. Rather, they're using the Christian congregation to assert more power by intertwining religious and political identity, which is why Christian nationalism is such a serious problem. Absolutely, I think the goal is to destroy the middle class and then have slave labor. If you are so poor you can't miss a paycheck, then they control you and can keep you in toxic job environments for little pay. Well said. Okay, so us dusty, crusty, atheist leftists, I'm including myself, banding with conservative Christians, I really do think, I don't know if we're there yet as a society, but I really do think it's going to be like one of our only chances to actually bring about real structural change for the better for everyone. And again, I don't know if we're there yet because the religious right is still kind of under the thumb of the Christian nationalists in the White House, who are like feeding them these lies that like, this is going to be great for you. When you look at everyone else outside of, Christian conservatism as the enemy, the more you do that, the better off you'll be in the long run. And that's a very, it's kind of insidious because people on the religious right aren't really realizing that it's going to end up being their own downfall. Like the more you take away individual freedoms from like marginalized communities, the sooner those individual freedoms will be taken away from the immense majority. And why do we know this? Because that's literally happened so many goddamn times. It keeps happening. I don't know why the United States, and particularly the religious right, is like, oh, this will be the first time a theocracy will work. It never works. It never works. I can't. I did want to watch a video if you guys want to humor me and watch this with me. I haven't seen this yet, but Christy Burke is one of my favorite content creators. She is an exvangelical like I am. She was raised deep in the belly of evangelical Christianity like I was. We love Christy, yes, absolutely. And she put out a video called The Unlikely Alliance That Could Save Us 5 days ago. And I wanted to watch it with you guys. I haven't seen this yet. But the thumbnail, which obviously isn't visible right here in this shot, said something like, "Exvangelicals and Christians unite?" ? And that's exactly what we're kind of talking about here because, again, I don't know if we're there yet. I think the religious right is still kind of too programmed, according to the religious and political leaders that are feeding them these lies that everything's going to be great when we go to Christian values or whatever. But that being said, there are a ton of Christians who are speaking out against Christian nationalism. There is a growing number of Christians who are waking up to the issues of kind of denying the separation of church and state. And so I think that is worth mentioning for sure. And I want to see what Christy has to say about it. So if y'all don't mind, let's take a peek.
After the election, I Googled churches near me. And I looked on Google Maps and I went through the list of every church within maybe like 30 miles of my house. And I emailed every single one. There was maybe not every single one. There were actually, there were a lot. The list was endless, but I think I emailed around 30 churches. And I said, my name is Christy. I am an atheist ex-Christian. I run a YouTube channel that helps people deconstruct, but I am not your enemy. And I know that the church has a history of fighting against oppression, fighting for the separation of church and state, and that Christians can be a very powerful force for good against authoritarianism, against fascism. And I didn't get a single email back. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, I'm not surprised. And I guess I'm always willing to give the benefit of the doubt. I do believe that there are still Christians and still Christian churches that if we could just tap into their community, they would be more than willing to fight for freedom, democracy, and their rights in their own way. And so I've kind of made up a little list of things that I think ex-Christians bring to the table, why they are suited for the resistance and for fighting oppression. And also Christians and their strengths, what they can bring to the table. I'm gonna start with the ex-Christians. And first up on my list, we've been here. We've resisted before in like the biggest way personally, and we won. and we know how it's done. I know what it's like to resist oppression. I know what it's like to go against authoritarianism. I already know their tricks. I know how they try to control, and I'm prepared, I am primed to continue resisting systems of oppression. And although there's a lot more to what we're experiencing in the United States than just Christian nationalism has been the tool that has been used for decades to prime America for what's happening right now. And so I have a pretty good grasp on how to resist that and fight against it. And not even in a way that is violent or full of rage, but in a way that is smart, creative, logical, and actually gets something done. And so if you are an ex-Christian and you walked away from everything, you've been through it. You've already done this before. You have the experience needed to continue resisting. We are truth seekers. So many of us left the Christian church because we wanted truth. We wanted to live in reality. We wanted what we knew inside and felt inside to align with the beliefs and the system that we follow. There's a reason we left. And most people don't leave because they had a bad experience. Usually when you have a bad experience in a church, you just find another church to go to. Your beliefs about God and spirituality don't change. What makes that change is that you realize that it might not be aligning with reality. And so you seek out truth. You seek out spaces that help you critically think and help you navigate with reason and rationality. And that is really important. And another thing a lot of people don't have. A lot of people are walking around just kind of not really practicing critical thinking. I do think it's a practice. It's something you have to continue to work at, and then it becomes kind of a habit, but it takes a while, and not everybody has that tool. So the fact that we are...
And that brings up like what I already, of course, have a ton of thoughts. That brings up what I say a lot, which is that I talk about Christianity a lot in my content on YouTube, on Twitch, and I will continue to actively fight against the institutions of Christianity. I think that the belief system keeps people disempowered. I think it holds people back from bodily autonomy. I think it holds people back from a more collective awareness of the human species as a whole, as opposed to the separation of believers versus non-believers. But I do try to always make the point that I don't hate everyday Christians. I pity them. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to watch this video, was because I don't think it's useful to kind of just pit ourselves against everyday Christians all of the time for so many reasons. I don't know. It's just more of an approach that can bring people who disagree with us kind of into these conversations, because again, it's our only chance to actually resist against tyranny in the United States. I agree with you, Kayse. I'm still super angry about all of the lies with Christianity, though. I need more self-work around this. That's a really interesting point, because another thing about deconstructing from Christianity is feeling like we've been lied to. Like, I remember really dwelling on that right when I left Christianity, feeling like I'd been lied to my entire life. But the weird part of that is looking back at all of the teachers and the pastors and the coaches who like raised me in this belief system, was the fact that they all believed what they were saying, and so therefore none of them were actively lying to me. So there's all this like anger and rage that's totally justifiable, and there's this like anger at feeling like you're being lied to, but no one's specific to point to. And so again, that's why it's this weird, like, I will consistently fight against the amorphous institution of Christianity that is lying to people, but it's like, it's not always these specific people. Now, that being said, the most powerful religious leaders, the most powerful preachers in the Christian church, I don't trust them per se. I do think that there is an element of greed. I think there's an element of in a lot of cases, active lying that happens. And also, the more powerful a religious leader in the evangelical Christian church, particularly white evangelical Christian churches in the United States, by and large have actively and openly supported Donald Trump and the Republican administration. And that intertwining, again, of politics and religion is corrupt. Like, it is just 100% corrupt. And so those religious leaders, I'm more interested in kind of holding to accountability. But again, like, it's just a weird kind of connection between everyday Christians and the people in power who are also taking advantage of them, right? And And so I think a lot of everyday Christians deserve our pity just as much as maybe our frustrations. When the pastor walks out of the church and steps into a Mercedes, I can't. I'm sick. Again, all of the belief systems of Christianity, I'm not advocating for just like letting them, run rampant across this country. It's more just like I'm looking at the everyday Christians who are still falling under those belief patterns, who are still getting their news from Fox, who are still, just watching these AI algorithms on fucking Facebook just warp their perception of reality over and over again, and I'm looking at them with pity. That's really my only point here. I did not know. I've been so obsessed with like content and learning about politics and reading my Communist Manifesto copy, all of this stuff, that I did not know that the Righteous Gemstones came out with a season 4. I'm missing out. Righteous Gemstones is creme de la creme of TV. I'm obsessed with it. I was told one time, and I haven't let it go, that it was based on, in large part, Oral Roberts University, which is a university here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm at. All of the people from my evangelical fundamentalist Christian high school that I went to, affiliated with the megachurch, so many of them ended up going to Oral Roberts University. And so the Righteous Gemstones, like, I cannot help but I have to watch it. Like, I'm gonna have to break my rule of like no TV right now and just like catch up on the Righteous Gemstones. It's so fucking funny. Okay, let's go back to Christy before I spiral.
Are just already natural truth seekers, and we seek out knowledge, and we're good at kind of bypassing disinformation and finding out the truth. I think that's a really important part of the resistance, and of educating others, informing others, and not getting trapped into the disinformation that is all around us. We understand the mindset of the Christian right because we lived it and we believed it. That's what we came from. And so I know a lot of people who deconstruct might not have come from right-wing Christianity, but my channel has always been geared toward one specific kind of, section of the Christian bubble. So we know how they think, we know what they believe, we know their tactics and just the thought processes that they go through. And so not only can we navigate that because we understand it, but also because we understand it, we can empathize. And empathy is so important. A lot of people think empathy is action, like it's something you do. But empathy is really just understanding. It's like emotional wisdom. It's the ability to understand someone's point of view, even if you don't have that point of view yourself. When you understand those that oppose you, it becomes a lot easier to kind of bypass all of the fighting and to get to the heart and the root of the problem. We have the ability to connect with and speak to the hearts of people on the opposite side of the political and religious spectrum in a way that those who have not had to walk away from Christianity, who have never been on the right, just can't, or might not be able to do as well. And so I do think it's a superpower. I think our ability to understand and speak to that side is such a powerful tool in unifying and cutting down on the divide that this administration has created between us.
That's another good point that I do talk about a lot, which is, this kind of sounds woo-woo, but I think it is important to at least give a second here before we go back to the video. I think that like the more I fall into learning about leftist policies and, there's a whole like culture on like YouTube and even Twitch or live streaming in general of like debate bros. And that can be really interesting content. It can be really effective content to consume in order to kind of have arguments ready when like people on the religious right are, ready to debate. And when you're in line at the grocery store, you can just like throw some educational information out there. I think like debate content though is like, it can be a little toxic, and also there's a lot missing from this idea. Like I hear this all the time that we don't want to like punch left or right when there's like infighting. We want to punch up. We want to like actually fight against the ultra rich, right? Well, I don't see that in practice a lot, but Christy Berg here is actually bringing light to it. And I do think that there is this element of what I call being heart-centered that we're missing out on the left. Because even in like atheist culture, which is kind of separate from like the leftist political content creation culture, both atheist and leftist content approach the conversations from like a rational, heavy point of view. And again, rationalism has its place. We all like have these opinions where we are at now because we are particularly rational people. But if we don't balance that out with the empathy that Christy is talking about, with being heart centered, like I bring up sometimes, like we're going to just continue perpetuating this us versus them mentality. And again, it's kind of woo woo to talk about how, as Super P says, like the emotional wisdom of actually connecting like heart to heart with people we might disagree with, or people who might not know as much as us, etc. If we don't approach it from a standpoint of connectivity before division, like we just won't ever get any good traction with any of these like rational arguments that may be tried and true, the best rational argument on the planet. If it doesn't connect with an audience emotionally, it has no power. It has no power. And so that's a really important point that I just wanted to bring up. Just wanted to say that.
I am not the enemy of the Christian. The Christian is not the enemy of me. But this administration, those in power, have made us believe that we are each other's enemies by feeding us a bunch of information about one another. And a lot of times it's not true. Our values are too big for their system. And I think for a lot of us, we had to fight so hard to hold these values and hold them confidently in the face of those we love and care about telling us how wrong and bad and evil we are, that when we figured out what justice was, what love and empathy and compassion, what that meant to us, and we had everyone in our lives telling us, you're wrong, you're satanic, you're evil, you're being tricked by Satan, and you'll be punished for it. We stood strong in that because we trusted our heart, we trusted ourselves, our intuition. We were able to not only find our values, but hold tight to them. Because when you have to work so hard to find them and, against all odds, they become that much more important to cling to and to have integrity for. And integrity is something that's lacking in a lot of our society, especially on the right. We have experienced a life after leaving a dominant authoritarian system. We know what it's like on the other side. We know how scary it is, how uncertain it feels, and we can use that experience to inspire others who are concerned, who want to resist, but are afraid of the consequences of that, afraid of losing their loved ones, losing support of others in their community. I think that we can speak to that uncertainty and that fear, and we can connect to people who are feeling that uncertainty and fear and help guide them through it. In our time, when we have healed, or at least have done the work to heal, acknowledge and live alongside our anger and our bitterness and our pain and our trauma, I don't really believe in getting rid of those things. I think that those things are very helpful. Our anger and our bitterness is literally what helps us fight for justice. And so I don't think we need to get rid of those things. It's learning how to acknowledge that they are there and that they help you, but knowing how to channel them, how to harness them, and how to use them for good rather than for bad. And so we can be the bridge between the religious and secular community in our time when we're ready to do so. That's how I think.
That's another really good point. Damn, these are bars is what these are. Also, Super P, the church is good at that emotional connection too. The music and lights are so key. Play that minor sixth Adele chord and pass that plate. Oh no, it's so true. Also, hi first time chatter. But that's such a good point. I mean, I experienced, quote unquote, what I thought was God in praise and worship at the mega church with like thousands of dollars into production every weekend. Like, of course I'm gonna feel God when you have like the bass fucking, making me tremble. Just by standing there. But I really like what Christy is saying here and I hadn't really thought about that before, about how when we deconstruct from evangelical Christianity or whatever high demand religion we're talking about, it is in essence an escape from authoritarianism. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but she's also bringing up something that I do talk about a lot, which is the fact that, again, in like a lot of atheist and even leftist communities, there's a lot of emphasis, again, on being rational and being right and debating Christians or debating conservatives and proving their points and all of this stuff. But it's like, so what? Like, congratulations, we might be more accurate about the nature of reality or how a society should be structured. Like, so what? I think it's important that we also showcase, like, particularly for atheists or agnostics or spiritual, not religious people, to see how we can have a meaningful, fulfilling life outside of religion, to see how we're not sacrificing any of our integrity or morality, and rather that we have a more moral approach to conversations because we are not being handed our morality from an old ass, dusty ass book, right? So I think those are really good points there. My experience talking to evangelicals about all this is because I'm not one they immediately shut down and will not hear anything I'm saying. Any advice on how to effectively communicate with these people? Okay, I see Super P responded. You can't go all in right off the bat. Listen and try to connect with the feelings behind their words. Make sure they know you're hearing them. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. Well said. And that's kind of why I was saying it's kind of hard to specifically put words to being heart-centered and talking about connectivity before divisive rhetoric first. But Super P said that really well right there, which is just try and find the common. I always try to find the common ground first. So like if a Christian conservative comes at me and says, okay, like for more specific example, a Christian conservative white man comes to me and starts talking about gender roles. It's so easy for me to immediately get defensive and be like, actually, patriarchy, da, 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 da. But in reality, I know, and whenever I remind myself of this and approach the conversation from this perspective, it goes better. I know that what this guy is actually projecting and communicating is feeling like he's not man enough, right? Because patriarchy which feminist always tries to stand up for the men in her chat? This girl right here, okay? I always try to give men just as much time in how patriarchy harms men just as much as women, because as I always say, it harms men and women equally. Men just have more access to resources to deal with that harm. But I know that when a Christian conservative white man comes at me and starts yelling about gender roles, I know that he is feeling like he's not enough. I know that he is frustrated because, maybe he's not getting emotional connection with a woman, which is what he really wants. And maybe he even has a warped misunderstanding and thinks that it's sex he wants, right? So when I come to him with the awareness that there is an underlying pain point, there is a frustration of his that is not being met by the same system that I have the awareness to argue about and have all of these rational, I have statistics that I can bring to mind, all of, out the wazoo. But until I get to the point and validate, like, hey, I actually think you're good just like you are, I think we might be talking about the same frustrations with the same system. And it's not a matter of me attacking that person. It's a matter of I think we all just kind of are looking for that kind of validation. So that's a really kind of convoluted way of saying what Super P said, and just try to connect with the feelings behind their words. But I think it's so important. And this is in all conversations. This is in religious conversations, political conversations, all of it. All right, let's see what Christy has to say. That was a good question, Robert.
I think the ex-Christians, I think that's, that those are their strengths and the things that they bring to the table. And I'm hoping that inspired you and reminded you of how much you've gone through and your strength and your ability and how you can use that in this resistance. But now I want to touch on why I think that the Christian church is primed and ready, possibly even more so than ex-Christians, to resist authoritarianism, resist fascism, and to preserve our freedoms.
Here we go.
And preserve their religious freedom, because that is also at stake too. First of all, Christians follow Jesus. He was a radical, anti-power, anti-wealth, anti-establishment. He flipped tables in holy rage. So this was not just a nice, happy guy who was just promoting peace and love to everyone he met. When he saw injustice, when he saw people that were being exploited and taken advantage of, he became angry in his righteousness and his desire for justice. And he quite literally flipped tables. He stood for those that society would not accept, didn't want to even touch or look at. He believed that being humble and lifting up the lowly, lifting up the marginalized, that was the key to a better society and a better future. Most of what Jesus did and taught was about love, empathy, compassion, justice, making sure that those whose voices were not heard were lifted up, and those whose voices were the loudest were quieted. Remember when he told them, don't go in the streets and pray like the hypocrites. Go into the closet and pray by yourself. Be quiet about it. But then he would meet with those that were being marginalized and oppressed, and he would amplify their voice, and he would listen to them, and he would give them his time. And it's what the left is all about, to be honest. It's about lifting up the marginalized. They get mad at us for engaging in culture wars and fighting for just 1% of the population. I believe now in our situation, we do have to speak to the issues that affect and impact everyone, and be careful not to get pulled into culture wars. But it is interesting how we are blamed for doing this, even though we don't even start most of the culture wars. We're blamed for doing this when that's literally the ministry of Jesus. And we're blamed by Christians who claim to follow Jesus. If Jesus were here today, I believe he would be flipping tables in every church that wasn't resisting this oppression, but was claiming him every Sunday. Another thing that I think is a really important thing for Christians to remember when considering if they should be resisting right now is that although the church in the United States and really all over the world has a long history of oppressing others, of oppression and causing suffering, that's not the entire church. And many Christian churches, including, and most importantly, in the United States, Baptist and even Southern Baptist, in some parts of history, they have a lot of experience in resisting government oppression, resisting the violation of the separation of church and state. There is a history there of churches standing for the separation of church and state because they understand that if the government can violate that with one area or one denomination, then they can do it across the board and everybody's religious freedom is at stake. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher. He claimed Christianity. He preached Christianity. He loved God. He loved Jesus. And he was considered an enemy of a lot of people and of the government because of his resistance against government oppression and his fight for civil rights. He believed so much in his values, his desire for justice and equality that took over his, anything that anybody had taught him about being submissive, just following the rules like a lot of people were doing at the time. He didn't do that because he knew that he had something worth fighting for, and that thing worth fighting for was the very thing Jesus told him to fight for. So he did that, even in the face of being arrested, even in the face of breaking the law. And I think that the Christians really need to remember that. I hope to see more Christians channeling people like Martin Luther King Jr. over people like Billy Graham, who had a really big kind of grip on the United States in the mid-century, but he was not willing to break the rules and get rowdy and cause some disruption in his town or in his country for civil rights. He felt like those that were fighting to be equal, to have the same rights as he was, needed to just calm down and pump the brakes, as he said. He said that after Martin Luther King Jr. was jailed in Birmingham. But there were two types of Christians. There were the kind that stood for themselves, that wanted to promote following the rules, even though that was very anti-Jesus. But there were also Christians that knew what they were fighting for was justice and equality and the things that mattered most to the Jesus that they preached. Another strength that the churches have that they really have this advantage over everyone else is the infrastructure. Churches have money, they have community, they have numbers, they have organization and programs and leaders and all these moving parts that work together, and they have been doing so for a very long time. So if we can tap into these communities, this is what the religious right did, okay? The religious right, the moral majority, the Heritage Foundation, when they were building up, they saw that there were all these Christians with all these churches, and they already had these big groups, and if you could just reach one, then you can reach them all. And so they were like, how can we tap into this? Paul Wayrick of the Heritage Foundation, he looked at the moral majority, Jerry Falwell, and he said, that guy, he has a lot of people listening to him. How can I tap into his audience? And so he partnered up with Jerry Falwell, and they partnered really over racism more than anything, probably, and a desire for power and control. And they started tapping into these Christian audiences and speaking to the churches and combining this political and religious messaging. And they had so much money and influence behind them that they were able to do that very easily by, creating radio shows and programming and getting all these people on their side that had influential voices that could just speak to their congregations and get the churches involved. And these are going to all these rallies across America and galvanizing support from the Christian churches. But before they did that, the Christian churches were actually fighting for civil rights. They were fighting for the right to...
I'm loving what Christy Burke, the points that she's making, but I've just had a flare of rage at once again recognizing how political parties tapped into the Christian church, and we now have to deal with Christian nationalism. I'm raging at the fact that churches are not fucking taxed. If we taxed billionaires and churches the way we tax everything else in this country, we would... Okay, I'm trying to let go of my anger. It's not at Christy saying it. It's a fucking reminder of what we're dealing with. My goddess. I'm fine.
Abortion. Southern Baptists, about 6 or 7 years before they were anti-abortion, were actually fighting for abortion rights for women. They believed that it was up to the woman to have autonomy over her body, and they didn't want the government interfering in that. That's a very dangerous thing, to tell the government that they're allowed to tell a woman what she is and isn't allowed to do with her body. And they believed that it wasn't until a baby took its first breath that it was a person that should be recognized and protected.
By the way, if you ever do need fuel in a some kind of debate with a fundamentalist Christian about abortion, just a friendly reminder that in the first few scriptures of Genesis, when God made Adam out of clay and molded Adam out of the physical elements of the world, according to Christian mythology, it wasn't until God breathed life into Adam that life was recognized. So just wanted to throw that out there, that the very first few scriptures of the Bible recognize that the breath is when life exists, not just a clump of cells. Thank you. Have a good day. Just kidding.
Southern Baptists were writing letters to their representatives and were actively encouraging their congregations and their communities to stand up for women's rights. And when Roe v. Wade was passed, they celebrated it. They were happy about it, most of them at least. And then it was 6-7 years later that they were tricked into these culture wars created by the Heritage Foundation, by Jerry Falwell and their friends. And they created this fight against women, against liberals, against leftists and atheistic communists and all this stuff. They created a fight against anyone that didn't conform to their goals and what they wanted to accomplish. None of us would really be fighting about abortion, and women would have rights and bodily autonomy, and Christians would support it had it not been for the manipulation of the religious right in the mid-century and in the 70s and the 80s. We can get Christians to kind of get back to their roots, to bypass all of the disinformation and the culture wars and the manipulation and the exploitation that they were dragged into by people in power that just wanted to make a lot of money and have a lot of power and serve corporate interests. If they can bypass that and get back to their roots, then they can be a strong fighting force with the infrastructure they already have, and tap into these communities and get them out and standing for real Christian values: love, justice, mercy, compassion, empathy. They can mobilize fast and in big numbers. And so I am trying so hard to learn how to tap into the churches. Again, I reached out to a lot of churches in my area. Nobody wrote back, but I'm not stopping. And I'm going to keep trying to meet up with religious leaders and encourage them not to go for a political party. It's not about being partisan. This is no longer a right versus left, red versus blue issue. This is a class struggle. This is the 99% against the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world that are trying to oppress us and get their way. And also, Christians have a moral voice that matters in America. Their morality is the standard, and I might not agree with all of it, but I think if we boil it all down, our values are probably very much the same. And the Christian right and Christian nationalists, the GOP, these fake Christians, even like Diana Harshbarger, who uses the Bible to hide behind her oppressive policies and initiatives, they have hijacked the Christian faith, and they have used it as a weapon against the American people. And if Christians start waking up and realizing that, they can take back their faith, take back their religion, and get back to what it was supposed to be, a personal relationship with God that brings them joy and hope, and that they can recruit people to their religion, not by forcing it, not by law, not by trying to be the moral standard, but by showcasing those values, showcasing that morality. I've always said that if Christians spent less time evangelizing, trying to enforce their religious ideologies via law and in our government, and they just went out into the world and lived by the words of Jesus: feed the hungry, heal the sick, show mercy to those who need it, lift up the marginalized. If they were just out there doing that every day, and that was what they did, and they cut out all the other stuff, I think they'd see more Christians recruited to their religion. Jesus said that you are to serve the world. You're supposed to be servants. You're not supposed to lift yourself up to be better, to be superior, and to tell everyone else what they're supposed to do. Your job is to be a servant of the world and to look around and say, how can I help? How can I make the world a better place? How can I honor the words of Jesus when he says to lift up the marginalized? And if Christians were grouping up and just doing that, just everyday mission work, I don't even think they'd ever even have to bring up Jesus to get people to ask them, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And can I join it? And I believe that the voice of the Christian is going to reach a lot more than the voice of the atheist or the ex-Christian. And that people are more likely, just
I
based
don't
on
know
our
about
society,
that.
to heed the words of the Christian than they are to, listen to anything I have to say. Because
I don't know. I know what she's saying. Like, I know where she's coming from. She's saying that, like, Christianity as a structural institution does have more power, it does have more voice. But I think that because the numbers are showing that people are leaving religion, organized religion more than ever. We've talked about this on this channel. Particularly Gen Z and particularly younger women are leaving the Christian church more than ever. And they're not going to other religions. They're just becoming more unaffiliated. Maybe that means spiritual, not religious. Maybe that means agnostic. Maybe that means atheist. Like the unaffiliated, the religiously unaffiliated numbers are increasing. So I do think that in time, and this is why I talk about like the natural life cycles of these institutions like Christianity, patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, they're all kind of coming to their natural, at the end of their natural life cycle all at once. So I do think that there is a future for a secular humanist approach to society. What I'm trying to learn more about is how on earth we're gonna fucking get there. Okay, let's wrap up this video. I want to see how she takes us home. Take us home, Christy.
that's just how our society is. We are a Christian nation, as they like to claim. And so I think they can use that to reclaim their faith instead of falling in line with the exploitation of their faith, which a lot of them are doing. I think that they need to reclaim it and they need to show the world what it's supposed to be. And it's supposed to be about fighting systems of oppression, fighting against wealth and power, and lifting up the voices of those that don't usually have much of a voice in our society. The Christian faith can stand as something that gives Christian strength and resilience and can inspire activism in the long run. We don't need to believe the same thing to fight for the same future. And
Agreed.
I've said it for a long time, and I really do believe it. If a Christian and an atheist or ex-Christian sat down together and talked about, they boiled down all the political noise and just talked about their values, I think that we would connect so much more. I mean, even I've been trying to find ways to boil down even the most divisive issues. And it's like when I come to thinking about abortion, that
no
that's
hate
a
like
divisive
Christian
one.
love.
Both sides
No hate like Christian love. I'm sick.
are like, you're a murderer. And I don't know that we can ever agree on our position on abortion, pro-life versus pro-choice. But if you were to take someone who is pro-life and someone who is pro-choice, and you boil out the noise, you boil out the political propaganda, and you try to find the one single common value that drives both of you to your position, I think you would both realize that human life is the value. You value human life. The person who is very anti-abortion values the life of the unborn. That is very important to them. It's human life and they want to protect it. The person who is pro-choice and wants to protect women values the life of the living, breathing woman and protecting someone who deserves to be protected and have autonomy over their body. So when you boil it all down, you forget all the propaganda and the noise, you both agree that human life is valuable and you fight for it. Now you just got to kind of sort through it to figure out how best to approach those values and to move forward in a way that honors both of your values for human life. And I actually think we can do that, but that's for another time. Maybe I'll make another video on that. I think we need to be working more to have more productive conversations, to find shared values and realize that both sides have challenged systems of oppression. Both sides have a history of seeking justice. And if we can connect on that, I think that will actually get very far. We have been told that we're enemies, but I believe we can be teammates. I believe we can form an alliance, and we might not agree on God and spirituality and the afterlife, but why do we need to? Does the God that created all of this and put all of this into motion really care if we agree about his characteristics or about what he wants? As long as our values for love, justice, empathy, kindness, compassion, well-being, life, liberty, happiness, if those values remain and we're all fighting for those same values, we have to coexist. We're trying to have a better future for all of us and recognize that there will never be a future where Christians don't exist. There will never be a future where atheists don't exist. We're always going to be here. We have to figure out how to balance and get along and to fight for the same common values that we both share, but we've been taught that we're enemies. There's all this this disinformation about each side, and it is intentional. It was fed to us by those in power that want us divided, because the moment we come together and form an alliance is the moment they lose. They lose, and we win. So why wouldn't we fight for that? Why wouldn't we figure out a way, not just for the sake of being nice, not for the sake of being kind and standing in a circle and getting along, but for the sake of our future, and to find the most logical, productive way to secure all of our rights. At the end of it, if we can secure our democracy and our freedom, the Christians can go their way and go to their church and practice their religion. We can go our way and, dance naked under the moon in our satanic circles or whatever they think we do. We can go our own way. We don't have to be best friends at the end of it, but can we work together to preserve the things that both sides really do and have always cared about? We've just been tricked into thinking that we don't actually share those same values by people that want to be in power over us, to control us, to hoard wealth, to exploit our labor, to use us, abuse us, to starve us, take away our healthcare, to completely abandon us as people and strip us of our humanity so that we can just be a system that continues to give them the life they want. None of us want that. If we really look at the reality of the situation, no matter who you are, if you're in the 99%, you don't want to just be someone that is being used, manipulated, exploited, and tossed aside, discarded, so that Jeff Bezos can buy another yacht, or so that Elon Musk can keep blowing up rockets in space and make his mission to Mars, and so these people can just make money and have power and feel good about themselves because they are the best, they are at the top, and they have hoarded all the wealth and taken everything from us so that they can have the best, not even just so they can have the best life, they already have the best life, but so they can have more, so they can be the best, they can be number one, superior. They're fighting for their own superiority, to be better than the other. And we're just trying to eat and raise kids and go to school and work our jobs and have enough time outside of our jobs to enjoy our lives. Enjoy the one life we know we're guaranteed. I know for a fact I'm only guaranteed this one life, and I want it to be good and secure, and I want to enjoy it, and I want to have freedom. Freedom is the most important thing. And those in the church want freedom for their religion. I want freedom from religion. And we all want the freedom to live and to be and to follow our most authentic path. And most of us have good hearts and good intentions. And even those that seemingly don't have probably just been used and manipulated and exploited by those in power that have the ability, the time, and the power to shift our perspective to benefit them, but not us and one another. We need each other. We need unity. We need to resist what's happening, and we need to preserve our freedom and our democracy. And I encourage you to reach out, to invite friends to join you in this resistance and in this hope for an alliance between ex-Christians and Christians, and that we can preserve what's important and special to us as Americans. For a long time, we have walked different paths, kind of walking in different directions, avoiding each other. But now I hope that we can move forward side by side, arms linked, as Americans, as human beings, at the heart of it. And all the other stuff we can sort out later.
Well said. I really liked that video. She touched on so many points that I think have been really important to me. By the way, I think this is very indicative of more girlies as atheist content creators kind of speaking up about less of a divisive debate bro culture. I know that's such a oversimplified generalization, but I think I think it's Christy's speaking the point right here. And I think, again, the last thing I'll say about this video is that when I think of working with current conservative Christians, I'm thinking of working with the version of me who used to be under the thumb of the religious leaders I believed. I used to be a full throttle fundamentalist, Christian conservative. I was under the umbrella of not realizing that I was in a white supremacist patriarchal society, and I was not living my best life at all. I believed that I needed to subjugate myself for men. I was not living my best life at all. And so that's who I like to think of when I think about conservative Christians that I want to reach across all of these conversations and hold hands with, so that we can sing Kumbaya on our way to resist the current descent into fascism in the United States. Oh my gosh, thank you guys for watching that with me.